You are listening to Book and Spade.
Do you believe in the resurrection of the dead? This is a question which a lot of people in the Western world simply know very little about. Or if they do, they are probably Neoplatonists. What do I mean by Neoplatonists? It's not a funny term to be using in a culture that doesn't even have regular recourse to the classics, philosophy. Plato, the student of Socrates, introduced to the world the beautiful conviction that I believe has already been in the heart of every man and woman and child, and that is the immortality of the soul living on, in union with that gift of divinity, the oneness of God at the end of our lives. Now, why is this an important point? A lot of people, if you ask, well, what happens when you die? They're going to say, well, the soul of myself, my grandparents, my dog, goes up and up and up and up to God and enjoys, eternal bliss for all time. And that is true. That is true. However, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the three Abrahamic religions, would argue, to my knowledge, I know for certain, when you're talking about Judaism and Christianity, Islam, I need to do a little more digging. They would argue that there is an additional component. To quote the Tanakh, to quote Barushi, the beginning of the Holy Scriptures, Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. God made a human being with a soul and a body. And in Second Temple Judaism, we know this during the Judaism of the lifetime of Jesus, what is very plain is there was a pretty widespread belief among the Pharisees, ironically, in the literal resurrection of the human body at the end of time. That this body would be angelic-alike. Hence Jesus' comments, so there will be neither marrying nor given in marriage. We can interpret what he means by that. I think that verse is horribly misunderstood. That's just my own private opinion. And that this body would be in the ultimate resurrection at the end of days. It would be without corruption, without death. Now, the New Testament confirms this reality by presenting Jesus as the first fruits of that bodily resurrection. The same body that Jesus gets when he rose from the dead is the same body we are going to get. And if you read the New Testament closely, Jesus walks through walls. Jesus is able to ascend, which means there's a kind of ability to pass through dimensional doors. And given the lives of saints within the Catholic tradition, like Padre Pio, and I believe in Eastern traditions like Elder Paisios, I'd have to dig a little deeper there, bilocation is possible, being in multiple levels at the same time. Someone asked me, well, if there are different levels in heaven, and St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, star differs in glory from degree to degree, suggesting that there might be, I'm not saying that there is, but that there might be. They asked, well, what if I and my spouse are on two different levels in the kingdom of heaven? To which I pointed out, who says you cannot be in multiple places at the same time? We are in three dimensions. We don't know what that multiple dimensionality will look like. But the ultimate reality that we're talking about here is the physical, earthy resurrection of the same body that goes into the ground, on the last day, except without the sting of death, without corruption. Why is that significant? That's why there were catacombs. That's why there are relics of saints. Something I wish the Reformation had not excessively removed. That is why cemeteries for a Christian are considered holy, consecrated ground. That is why we say in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. And that is why we would insist that life is sacred from the beginning to its very end. And I am aware in an ELCA Lutheran context, which leans a little more progressively, this is where I might draw the ire, might draw the consternation of some. But this is why it is philosophically consistent to say that, therefore, physical life, biological life, is sacred from conception to natural death. Precisely because the human person doesn't develop into being sacred. The human person, from the moment of his or her creation, is sacred from the... Now, I'm not saying that there aren't nuances. I'm not saying that there are not difficult moral qualms and conundrums. I'm not saying that this moral absolute that I've just provided can evenly be distributed without wringing of hands, tears, confusion, anxiety, and real-world situations that are complicated. And I'm certainly not saying that anyone needs to accept this private opinion of mine as law. And I think one of the great gifts of the Reformation is the ability to disagree on grounds of conscience and engage in a reasonable debate, and to do so in an environment of love, in an environment of charity, something which I think we are failing at in today's tribalistic culture. However, I do agree with the teaching of the Church Universal throughout time and space that says that the body is inherently sacred. The human person is inherently sacred, made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore there is a moral prerogative to defend the human person. And this extends to questions, by the way, which are equally unsavory for both right and left in today's political climate, over then what you do with the migrant, the orphan, and the widow. What you end up doing about those who are disabled, like myself. What you do in regards to those who are marginalized and oppressed, even if their identities, lifestyles, etc., don't fit what is necessarily the perception of the natural law as being good. We need, in this time, I believe, to recover what Jesus unveils again and again in the pages of the New Testament, in the words that have been delivered to us by the apostles, who from the beginning were eyewitnesses of the word and of the truth. And that is, we are called in him as royal sons and royal daughters. Our identity in Ephesians is to be seated in the heavenlies with Christ. Death does not have the final word. Sickness does not have the final word. And therefore, governments, institutional forms of oppression, any attempt to try to alienate, any attempt to try to destroy or harm the human person is an assault upon Jesus himself. This is why when Saul of Tarsus, is on his way to persecute Christians, what is most powerful and unique is when he encounters the resurrected Jesus. Jesus says, we all know what he says. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He doesn't say, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting my followers, my students, my acolytes? Why are you persecuting me? So as I'm recording this, when bombs are falling on children in the Middle East, as people are held captive by terrorists, as there are children who are trying to cross a border from one nation to another, starving, thirsting to be free. Well, there are, yes, I will say it, unborn and elderly persons who are being offered on the chopping block of the world's perception of inconvenience. There is a universal prerogative to defend the sacrality of the human person. Because if our dignity does not proceed from God, then it must proceed from the government, the state. And if we look at the revolution of Mao Zedong in China, if we look at the Russian Revolution and its horrible consequences, if we look at the forms of radical totalitarianism, fascism, communism, or any ism that places itself above the human understanding that we are filled and formed by the divine hand of God. If we look at those institutions which have tried to scrub away, which have tried to remove our identity as children of God, when we look at what we have done in the past, we realize exactly what God said to Moses in I believe the book of Deuteronomy, that there is a way that leads to life and there's a way that leads to death. Today, let us choose life and not death, but with compassion, and not seeing our brother or our sister as the enemy, but instead seeing them as a beloved child of God. Pastorally, we need to accompany people where they are at. Theologically, we need to know where we stand. And then humbly critique ourselves every day. How am I walking with the Lord? Do you believe in the resurrection of the dead? Your belief in the bodily resurrection affects your perspective on life. If you believe in only the resurrection of a soul and not a body, then it really doesn't matter what happens to the widow, the orphan, the migrant, the elderly, the unborn, does it? But if you believe in the resurrection of the body, if you believe in the sacred quality of the body, if you believe that you are your body, then, and you are your soul, then, well, that changes everything, doesn't it? And that's why I'm glad that there is an empty, vacated tomb in Jerusalem today.